Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Audi Cycling YouTube channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Dwars, Vlaanderen Velogames. Of course, it's going to be another one of those where there is going to be the Super Classico, the Classic Squad game, and also the Women's Race. So we're going to try rattle through all three of those. Of course, after Ghent Wevelgem, where it was a very wet and rainy affair, this week looks like the Dwars, Vlaanderen is going to be a relatively cloudy, not very windy event, so therefore that could certainly play into who you're thinking of picking. Again, kind of similar to Ghent Wevelgem, this race you could pick a team full of attackers if you think the race is going to go that way. You could pick a team full of more sprinter riders, or you could try and split the difference between the two, so I'll be kind of covering all the riders and their relative niches and respective capabilities in this race. Alaphilippe being the most expensive one. Quite expensive considering that we know that Alaphilippe's not in the greatest of form at the moment, and also Quick-Step have Tim Merlier here, who seems to have a bit more backing of the team. When you look at their relative star list, it seems more like lead-out orientated as opposed to setting up Alaphilippe for an attack. So I'd probably be avoiding Alaphilippe. I just don't think he's been looking that great recently, and at 28 there's certainly better options a bit further down. De Lee, again, like I said for Ghent Wevelgem, there's also Caleb Ewan here, so you're not sure which one we're going to be sprinting for. I think that it could be either of them, and therefore I'm not a massive fan of picking teams with multiple sprinters just because you don't know which one they're going to be going for. And both of them are relatively expensive, especially when you consider that Jasper Philipsen at 26 is actually probably a better choice than both of them, considering that he's won Bruges de Pan really recently. And without Van der Poel here or Søren Kragh, the whole team will definitely be around trying to support Philipsen in trying to get a sprint victory, I presume, more than likely. So I think that Philipsen is probably the best, more expensive rider. Christoph at 24, surprisingly very absent in Ghent Wevelgem, despite the fact that he's very well renowned for being a good rider in wet conditions. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with Christoph there, but if it is a sprint, he could certainly come inside the top 10. Merlier, I think, is going to be another dangerous one. I think back to when Dylan van Baarle won this race in 2021. Merlier, I think, finished in third place in that race when he was still riding for Alpecin. So he's clearly very capable of getting over these climbs. A lot of them aren't cobbled climbs, they're paved climbs, so therefore it does help those sprinters to not get dropped as much when the attacks start flying. So I think that Merlier is a good one. Mads Pedersen kind of strikes a nice balance between somebody who could be in an attacking group but could also sprint for victory, but also in the same way that could be a disadvantage because he might get stuck between which strategy he wants to go with. Nevertheless, I think that Pedersen's looking really strong recently, so therefore I think that he is a good addition to anybody's team. Pidcock, on the other hand, a bit questionable considering that he's coming back from his injuries at Tirreno Adriatico, and it usually takes these riders, well, it seems to take them a bit of time just to get back into things. I'm not really sure what Pidcock's injuries were. It says on PCS that he had concussion, so I'm not sure how much that's impacted his training or his form, but he is back from his injury, so I presume that he's still in decent form, but perhaps not in the tip-top shape that we'd be perhaps expecting from him. But saying that, it wouldn't surprise me if I see Pidcock on the attack and doing quite well in this race. Jumbo come with Van Baarle and Benoot as their kind of spearhead men in terms of attacking, which is certainly lacking the likes of Van Hooijdonk, Tratnik, Laporte and Wout van Aert, so perhaps Jumbo-Visma aren't going to be as dominant in this race. They also have Olav Koy, who could be their sprinting option, and I just don't see Van Baarle and Benoot really being able to put the pressure on teams as they have done in previous races. Stefan Kung, kind of similarly, will be on the attack, I presume, alongside his teammate Valentin Madouas. And I think that if you're going to go for an attacking-based team, I would probably say that Kung and Madouas are great ones to put on, considering that Groupama don't have a sprinter and will therefore be looking to make this race as hard as possible. So if you wanted some attackers, probably the two guys from Jumbo and the two guys from Groupama would be a really good start. Ganna as well, looking really good recently with his Milan San Remo. Of course, he did crash in Ghent Wevelgem, so that's worthwhile noting. I'm not sure what kind of injuries he's still suffering from that. Whether he can get over those in a couple of days and then perform at Dwars is still up for debate. But I think that Ganna is still probably a pretty decent shout to sort of do what Dylan van Baarle did in 2021, where he just soloed away to victory. I certainly think Ganna could do something like that. You've got other sprinters like Meeus and Izzolo, who are not bad choices, but probably there are better ones. out there, including Olav Koy. I just think that Koy's looking really good recently. He's good in the wet conditions. He's good at getting over these climbs. He's very much a bit like Philipsen, and I think that he could be a really good choice for a lot of teams. Sepp van Mark has looked really strong recently, but it's probably worth noting that he might be a better choice for your classic squad game because he's like 8 credits there, so like a really big reduction in price. So I think that Sepp van Mark could be a good one for that, but for this one, he is relatively fast in a sprint, so I reckon still a top 10's possible if you wanted to back Sepp van Mark. 16-point riders, maybe Gaviria might make it here. I think that it is not massively hard. I think that Gaviria could contest a sprint and the finish, but we also have Max Canter, so which one we're going to go with I'm not too sure. Pollitt has looked strong recently, so he would be a nice one considering that they have Meus for the sprint, and Pollitt has been very active in a lot of races, always finishing relatively high up, and I think that for 16 credits that's quite good value. Nielsen Paulus as well has just been in sensational form so far this whole season, and therefore I think that Nielsen Paulus could be a really good one. Considering that we saw one American in Mathieu Jorgensen doing well at E3, could we see another American in Nielsen Paulus doing really well at Dwars Vlaanderen? I wouldn't put it past him, considering that EF don't really have the main figurehead. They've got a Bettiol, but I think that Paulus could honestly do better than Bettiol in this race. Haller, Louvel, McClay, Mezgec, these are all guys who could finish quite well in a sprint, but you're going to have to try and pick which Arkea rider to go with, because they've also got Luca Mazzato as well, so, and Jens Verbeermans, who's 10 credits, so take your pick of the Arkea guys. Haller will more than likely be a domestique. Mezgec will sprint if Groenewegen is dropped, which, let's face it, is kind of likely to happen. Navarez, not a bad one either, but we also have Pidcock here. We've got Sheffield, we've got Ganna, so Navarez, he did finish 14th in Ghent-Wevelgem, so certainly in some decent form, but probably not the fastest sprinter, so we'll need to get into a move earlier on. I don't really think the other 14-pointers are that brilliant. Maybe Walscheid for a sprint. 12-point riders, Casebold didn't start Ghent-Wevelgem, but I do quite rate his chances of doing well in a sprint, in a race like Dwars Vlaanderen, especially considering there's no Cav. They've got Lutsenko, but I think that Bol, he didn't start Ghent-Wevelgem. I'm not sure why, whether he's ill or whether he just saw the rain and said, hell no, I'm not riding in that. If it was just that he didn't want to ride in the rain, then he's probably still a good choice. 10-point riders, not that many great ones. Tom de Vrint maybe. Geniet has been up there in some of the classics alongside Kung and Madouas, but probably more a domestique. Sarro possibly for a sprinting option from AG2R. That's about it really. 8-point riders, Chris Neylands was good at E3 actually, so maybe he could be a good one. If not for this race, then maybe for Flanders actually. Hugo Page, probably the fastest sprinter for Intermarché in this race, but I feel like we're all living off the hype where he did really well in the Tour Down Under, and he just hasn't quite repeated that so far this season ever since then. So are we all just still living on that dream of the Tour Down Under? Possibly. 6-point riders, Aski possibly. Cedric Boulens finished 7th, I think, at Bruges de Pau, so a decent one there. Bissiger finished 20th in Omloop and in E3, so quite good at getting through these attritional races. I reckon he could be a pretty safe 6-point rider to be going with. De Klerk, if you wanted the assist points on Malia, perhaps winning. Kim Hajduk's a good sprinter for Ineos, but whether he'll actually survive or whether he'll just be a domestique as well. You've got the Trek guys for Mads Pedersen. Maybe guys to go in the breakaway, like the Movistar guys, like Matthias Norsgaard usually gets in the break for Movistar, so he could be a decent one to be going with. Postelberger's finished top 10 in this race a few years ago. Alexis Renard finished top 10 in Ghent-Wevelgem the other day, but is that just because it was rainy? Possibly, so there might be better options. Gleb is not looking that great recently, but I'm going to call him out anyway just because he is a sprinter and he could definitely do something in this race. And then there's the Van Dijk twins for Jumbo. Very exciting talents, but probably more likely to be domestiques here. Get the assist points in for them. 4-point riders, again, you're looking at guys to go in the break. Frison and Flynn, probably my favourite ones, considering that Flynn finished top 10 in some sprint recently in Belgium. So that's kind of promising, considering that they don't have the greatest team here. Frison finished 4th in Bruges de Pau and Ghent-Wevelgem, so clearly in some decent form. But again, was it just because it was rainy? Possibly, but he is showing some decent form at the moment, so therefore I wouldn't put it past him. I think he's probably the safest 4-point rider. And then you got some other DSM guys or people for assist points on sprinters. And that's about it. This is the team that I have at the moment. It's very sprinter heavy at the moment. That's sort of the way how I'm seeing this race going. But I might swap out some people for more attacking options in terms of swapping out, say, Merlier and Coy for like a Kung and then Paulus, and then putting those points onto Friesel and Flynn for Chris Naylands or something like that. That could certainly work out. So that's what I'm thinking for the Super Classico. Now we'll move on to the Classic squad game. So in terms of the Classic squad game, we've got 19 transfers left to be using. So we've got quite a lot to be dumping into some races. But I'm still quite apprehensive to put some into Dwars. I haven't made any yet. But currently I have Philipsen, Pedersen and Olav Koy as my main riders. And then I've got some assist point possibility in Van der Bosch, Gibbons and Mikkel Bjerg. So a pretty decent framework so far, but in terms of transfers that I might make, probably looking towards some sprinters like maybe Merlier might come into the team. I might also put in... Merlier's kind of the main one. Nobody else is really kind of jumping out at me, especially since at the moment I've got Wout van Aert and Van der Poel in here, who are obviously both going to be doing Flanders. So if I swap both those guys out for sprinters in this race and then swap them both back in for Flanders, then that's 4 transfers used. I'd much rather just try and not use these transfers and use them later on for perhaps like a Schelde Prez, which if it's not rainy conditions might be kind of more guaranteed to get points because you can really stack up on sprinters then. So I'm tempted to hold off and not use transfers here, but I'm also tempted to put in some sprinters. So I haven't done anything as of yet, but that's just the thinking which I'm going through for this race. There are some decent riders which I'll perhaps point out. Like I said earlier, Sepp van Mark is 8 points here, which is actually quite good value, I think. Paulus is 8 points as well. Olav Koy at 8, I quite like. 6 point riders, you got probably some decent ones. I think there's Chris Naylands at 6, could be one which I might put on just in case to kind of cover the attacking options as well. But other than them, there aren't too many which I'm really jumping out at. So that's my thinking for the Classic squad game. And then on to the women's. We have this team so far. So Vollering, Reuser, Giorgi Bastianelli, Guazzini and Liana Lippert. You can make really good teams with the women's riders just because some of them are quite good in the mid level of pricing. So of course I've gone for the 2 SD Works favourites because they do really well. Pfeiffer Georgie's been looking super strong recently and quite strong in a sprint as well. So people just in good form are just great choices. Bastianelli good at again Velogames. Lippert hasn't raced since Stradie but seems to probably be the leader for Movistar. And then Guazzini at 6 is an absolute steal considering that she'll be the sprinter for FDJ, and also she's quite good at climbing. But you could also go for Didriksen. She'd be quite a good one to be picking up as well considering that she's finished top 10 in some sprints so far this year. 4 point riders, you have Eleanor Barker, finished I think just outside the top 10 or inside the top 10 for Gent Wevelgem recently, so she's probably the best 4 point rider to be picking. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments down below for all of the 3 competitions. And yeah, all there's left to say is to stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!